Welcome back, folks, to Wrestle Rant, where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch in the WWE Network. For the entire month of January, I will be talking all about the past Royal Rumble events. Today, I'll be talking about the 2007 installment. In coming videos, I will be talking about the 2008 shows, 2010, and 2011. So like I said, today is all about the 2007 Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Kicking off the show was a tag team match, no tag team titles on the line, between the Hardys, Matt and Jeff, against MNM, Joey Mercury, and Johnny Nitro with Melina in their corner. So these two teams had a very fun series of matches. I talked about this in my 2006 December to Dismember pay-per-view review, one of the saving graces of that show. But the Hardys and MNM have always had great chemistry, and this was around the time that Johnny Nitro was feuding with Jeff over the Intercontinental Championship, so it was a nice little tie-in between that singles feud between Jeff and Johnny, and then the Hardys and MNM. Like I said before, there weren't any tag team titles on the line. This was just a standard, straight-up feud between two great tag teams. And they got a lot of fun matches out of them, like this one, like I said before, at the December to Dismember pay-per-view, on this pay-per-view, and they would also meet at the No Way Out pay-per-view of the following month in six-man tag team action, also involving Chris Benoit and MVP, I think it was. So, very, very good match to kick off the show. Got about 15 minutes, more so than the World Heavyweight Championship match, that was pretty surprising, and the ECW Championship as well, but that's not really all that surprising, since the ECW title match was always like the Divas match of the pay-per-views back in the day. But still, though, really, really good matchup. Enjoyed the action. One thing that kind of stuck out to me was as being a little bit strange, and maybe it was because of what happened after WrestleMania, was that the Hardys won almost all of their encounters. Maybe MNM won like some singles matches on Raw or SmackDown or ECW, whatever, or maybe they won a tag team match on one of the other shows. I'm not really sure, on Raw or SmackDown. But in all the major outings that these two teams had at December to Dismember, on this pay-per-view, and like I said before, the No Way Out pay-per-view as well, even in that matchup, even though it was six-man tag team action, the Hardys won every single time. And like I said, I don't really have a problem with that. The Hardys got a big rub out of it, if only because they would go on to win the World Tag Team titles after WrestleMania against John Cena and Shawn Michaels. That's who they would win it from. So probably they may have known that ahead of time. Probably not, but they probably knew that the Hardys, even though they were on separate brands, which I thought was interesting. Jeff was on Raw at the time. Matt was on SmackDown. Even still, they were able to reign as World Tag Team Champions over on Raw and SmackDown both after WrestleMania. But I always found that a little bit to be interesting, that they won every single one of their matches, and they probably knew that MNM wasn't going to be around for the long term, and Mercury was gone shortly thereafterwards. But nevertheless, great match to kick off the show between the Hardys and MNM. Up next for the ECW Championship. Now, this was the first show in WWE history where the WWE World Heavyweight title and ECW World Championships were all on the line. I think probably not the only time in history I think that the ECW title was also on the line. Not in the 08 Rumble, 09 Rumble, yes. 2010 Rumble, yes. 2011 Rumble. ECW is gone, so I think this is only one of two shows that was possible. Or one of three shows, I guess I should say. But anyway, Bobby Lashley defending against Test. If you took a side-by-side comparison between Test back in 01, 02, and then in 2007, 5-6 years later, it's crazy how different this guy looked. I don't know if he was jacked up on steroids or what, but not even that too. Just the facial and everything, his face and the hair and everything about him was extremely different from what it was in like right around the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression era. Completely different look. You wouldn't even know it was the same guy if you didn't know who Test was. But, still the guy was an impressive athlete. Even in his final years, of course, he would pass away in 2009, unfortunately. Rest in peace, Test. But and I think this was not one of his final matches, but one of his final few matches, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. This was in January. I think Test would stick around in WWE before departing from the company a few months later, I think it was. Maybe right before WrestleMania. Can't remember exactly. But this was a good match, though. I did enjoy it. Test had a very good outing here. The finish struck me as a little weird with Test getting himself counted out. I don't know if they continued the feud past this point. They must have if they had Test counted out. Otherwise, why not just have Bobby Lashley win via pinfall or submission? Especially since they were building him up to be the guy at WrestleMania 23 to beat Umaga and side with Donald Trump. And, Bobby Lashley, of course, got a huge rub out of that. 07, the first half of 2007, was arguably Bobby Lashley's year. He reigned as ECW champion on 2 different occasions, at one point for over 4 months. Beat Mr. McMahon at the One Night Stand pay-per-view in June of that year, before going on to contend for the WWE title on 2 different occasions, both matches involving John Cena. So Bobby Lashley was, one of the premier picks on Monday Night Raw in that year's draft. But like I said before, that was only the first half. The second half, he got injured, was eventually released from the company in February of the following year, which sucked. But still, though, going back to the topic at hand, good matchup here between Bobby Lashley and Test. Nothing, earth-shattering, but for what it was, though, it was a good match. And up next for the World Heavyweight Championship, Batista defending against Mr. Kennedy. Another really good matchup, nothing too great. Like I said before, it struck me as a little bit odd that the tag team matchup between the Hardys and Eminem got more time than this matchup did. This match only went 10 minutes. But, Mr. Kennedy had been built up as such a threat to not only the World Heavyweight Championship, but the main event scene as a whole in the year and a half that he was with the WWE. And they heavily touted going into this matchup that he had prior wins over former World Heavyweight Champions in Booker T and Chris Benoit, over Rey Mysterio, The Undertaker, all these top-tier names over on the SmackDown brand. And he got a huge rub out of that, and he was talking about how he was the fastest rising superstar in SmackDown history, and part of that was true. He really was. And of course, although he would come up short here of winning the World Heavyweight Championship, and it was kind of obvious Batista was winning, he had just won back the World Heavyweight title at Survivor Series against Booker T only 2 months prior to this. But he would go on to WrestleMania 23 and win the Money in the Bank ladder match, and I'll talk about that when I review WrestleMania 23, hopefully. When I review all the WrestleManias here in the channel, that's going to be a big task, but I'm hoping to do it. But nevertheless, though, he would go on to win the Money in the Bank ladder match that year. So they obviously thought very highly of Mr. Kennedy for for quite a period of time. From 06 to 07, going into 08 as well, before the whole injuries happened and he got released and all that whole controversy. But if this match was any indication, this was only the sign of what was to come for Mr. Kennedy. Unfortunately, he would never win a world championship in his WWE tenure, but he would come oh so close on various occasions. But good matchup here, good showing from Mr. Kennedy. Like I said, nothing too earth-shattering, nothing too monumental, but a good showing from Kennedy and a good undercard World Heavyweight Championship match on the whole. Up next for the WWE Championship, John Cena defending against Umaga in a rematch from the New Year's Revolution pay-per-view in last man standing match rules. So I thought this was a great match. I've heard rave reviews about this matchup. I've only seen clips and highlights from YouTube in past years. This was the first time I've ever seen the match in its entirety. And I thought it was a great match, a great showing for Umaga. And I talked about this in my New Year's Revolution pay-per-view, that John Cena at this point in time, it was kind of before he was known as the guy who overcame the odds at every single obstacle. Kind of. He had been on top around 2 years by this point. But, today, it's like etched into his character, even by, 2010, 2011. The guy who ended the undefeated streaks of Umaga, of the Great Khali, Lord Tensai, Bray Wyatt, all these different guys. And Umaga was one of the many guys that I mentioned, and he would lose to John Cena in his first ever pinfall loss at the New Year's Revolution pay-per-view only a few weeks before this show. And one of the best parts about the last man standing match is that you don't have to get pinned to lose. Umaga looked very strong in defeat. He took, at the end of the matchup, he probably took another FU at one other point in the matchup that I can't remember off the top of my head. But at the end of the matchup, he took one FU from John Cena. He got right back up, and this is after going to war with John Cena. And then John Cena would take the ring rope, that, the rope that they wrap around the ring, that Armando Estrada, Umaga's manager at the time, took off of the ring. He knew he was going to have Umaga, he was going to aid Umaga in giving it to him. John Cena reversed it, hit him with an FU, took the ring rope for his own, and choked Umaga with it in the STF. And I thought that was a great maneuver and a great way to put out Umaga for the victory. So I thought that was an awesome finish, made John Cena look vicious and the blood rushing down his face. And that was a great visual, too. He would get busted open at one point in the matchup and had the blood rushing down his face. And, of course, now when they show the highlights of this matchup, they always have him black and white because of that. But if you go back and watch on the network, it's all in color, which is awesome. But I thought that was an awesome finishing sequence. But like I said, the match in the hall, very, very brutal. Pretty standard wrestling match for, the first portion of it. But down the stretch, they would really knock it up a notch. with all the stuff that they did. Umaga going to a commentating table after missing John Cena. They brought in the steel steps. They brought in a couple steel chairs from what I remember. Like I said, the ring ropes. So a lot of hardcore stuff from Umaga and John Cena. Even though this was Umaga's second loss in 9 months, he would still be made out to look very, very strong in defeat. It's only a shame they never really went anywhere with Umaga after this point. And like I said in my Push to Punish article on Umaga back on Bleacher Report a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned how they build up these monsters for John Cena to demolish. That's basically what they did with Hulk Hogan back in the day. They would build up these monster heels only for Hulk Hogan to overcome them. But in today's wrestling, it's really not all that. It's not that similar in that those heel monsters that you build up can be used for something even after they're defeated. And more often than not, after they suffer their first singles loss, they fall off the face of the earth. And Umaga, although wasn't one of those superstars, he would go on to WrestleMania 23 to face Bobby Lashley in a big Battle of the Billionaires matchup with Mr. McMahon and Donald Trump in the respective corners. So that was a big money matchup, obviously, so a big position for Umaga to be in. He would go on to win the Intercontinental Championship twice that year, feud with Triple H, feud with maybe Shawn Michaels for a period of time that I can't remember off the top of my head. But he had a big year in 2007. The only issue is that I think he could have been much more than that in his tenure with WWE. And one can argue he was his own worst enemy in the later half of his career when, with the drugs and everything else, getting suspended and eventually getting released from WWE after refusing to going to WWE rehab. But, even before that, though, I thought he should have been World Heavyweight Champion. Maybe not necessarily WWE Champion, but when they traded him over to SmackDown in 2008, maybe that was, too little too late, but I think he could have been a world champion over on the SmackDown brand if they pushed him properly and they didn't have, just give up on the character completely after he lost his first few matches to John Cena. But, bottom line, awesome match. Definitely go back and check it out on this show. And then we get to the main event, obviously the 30-man Royal Rumble match, where the winner went on to WrestleMania to earn a world championship match of their choosing. And it was comical, too, because the next night, The Undertaker, who would win this matchup, would, I don't know if it was the next night. I think it was the next night. I don't remember exactly when it was from. Maybe after No Way Out. I can't remember exactly. But Undertaker would line up. I think it was the night after Rumble. I'm sorry. It was the night after the Rumble where the 3 world champions would be lined up. John Cena, the WWE champion at the time, Batista, the World Heavyweight champion at the time, and Bobby Lashley, the ECW champion at the time. So those 3 men would line up, and Undertaker would, take a long, hard look at all 3 guys, deciding which champion to choose for WrestleMania. And it was just comical seeing Bobby Lashley in there. Not because it's Bobby Lashley, but because he was the ECW champion. And this was around the time that ECW wasn't even around for a full year, and they were still somewhat taking it seriously, and they were really trying to push ECW as like the 3rd top tier brand on the level of Raw and SmackDown. When in the end, it really wasn't, but that was comical though. But the match itself, I enjoyed. It was a good Rumble, not the best Rumble that I've seen in watching all these past Rumbles, not the worst, but I thought it was solid. I thought it was really good. They didn't have many stories. There were, a couple stories here and there. Kenny Dykstra and Ric Flair, who I recognize that feud from the New Year's Revolution pay-per-view from earlier on this month. They had a brief altercation earlier on the Rumble. They didn't last, that didn't go too long. Finlay would last a while. He would last over a half an hour in this matchup, which was huge. Might be the Iron Man in this match, looking down the card right now, aside from, actually Edge was. Edge would enter at number 5, much like in, I think, the 05 Rumble. He entered at number 5, either 4, 5, or 6, one of the early numbers, and he would last until the end of this matchup, too. So Edge is the Iron Man in this contest, so he had a great showing here. And that'd be another one of these matches' main stories in the partnership and eventual dissension between Rated RKO, Edge, and Randy Orton. Because even though they were the World Tag Team Champions at the time, they were still always turning on each other. It was, it's what the Royal Rumble matchup is all about, turning on your partners in order to come out victorious as, a World Heavyweight Championship match, a world title match is on the line for WrestleMania in the main event. So that's what this is all about at the end of the day. So they teased that. They pushed that very heavily, and I thought that was a great story between Edge and Orton after they worked together for almost all of the matchup before Edge ultimately turned on Randy Orton. Almost did. They teased some tension. It looked like Randy Orton was going to be the babyface. That feud never really led anywhere. They would both be in the Money in the Bank match that year, the Money in the Bank ladder match, which I thought, they could have been in their own matchup at that show, one-on-one, and then Edge would go on to SmackDown, so that never really came to fruition, that feud. But still, though, very strong showings from both Randy Orton and Edge in this matchup. Aside from that, this really wasn't the most notable Royal Rumble. There weren't any returns. The Great Khali eliminating 7 superstars down the stretch. Had a very strong showing, I mean, for better or for worse, but this was around the time when Khali was still a legit threat. And, Shawn Michaels would be on fire for most of the Royal Rumble coming out to the DX music. And I'll get to the finish in a sec. I'm just kind of looking down the Rumble, the list of combatants and see if there were any other stories in this matchup. And there really wasn't that many. Like I said before, this was the first Royal Rumble show and one of the only few to feature a WWE World Heavyweight and ECW title match. This was also the first Rumble in history to feature superstars from both Raw, SmackDown, and ECW, and I'm not including the Invasion in this one. So that was pretty notable. I mean, we had CM Punk in there who had a pretty good showing. They put him over in a big way. Jerry Lawler was saying that he's going to be a big star in the future, and little did they know at that time that he would go on to become one of the most iconic figures in recent WWE history. That was pretty funny to hear Lawler talk about that. And they would also eventually feud, in 2012, which was, also interesting to note. But, getting to the finish here, like I said before, most of the matchup, it was solid, but there weren't many, notable stories that they pushed, not many narratives. It was a pretty good Rumble. It was a good Rumble, but it wasn't the most epic or most memorable because they really didn't, do much about it. I mean, they were touting this as the most star-studded Rumble in history, but I mean, I didn't really get that impression from watching this. It wasn't even like it was a bad Rumble. It was just kind of, standard stuff, not really anything great like the 05 Rumble, which I thought was awesome, in my opinion anyway. But what was awesome was that we get to the finish after Shawn Michaels. He survived nearly 25 minutes and comes down to the very end with number 30, The Undertaker, becoming the first man in history to win the Royal Rumble from the 30th entrance spot. And those two had a great final few minutes like Jericho and Sheamus did back in 2012. These two, something very similar. And I talked about this in some of my past Rumble reviews, and that I love when it comes down to the final two. They tell a great story. And in 96, when Michaels immediately won the matchup after tossing over Diesel, I could see why they did it. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I would have liked if they gave that more time. This they did. They gave it a lot of time, much like they did with Batista and John Cena in 05. They would give this more time than those two. But, of course, Shawn Michaels in his hometown of San Antonio on this show. Undertaker, they wouldn't acknowledge it, obviously, in his home state of Texas. So, two home state favorites to win this matchup. And of course, this was obviously before their long series of matches at WrestleMania 25 and WrestleMania 26, respectively. So, and I mean, obviously, we had seen them work before in the late 90s, before Michaels retired for the first time. But, seeing them collide almost over 10 years later for the first time in over a decade was crazy. And I thought that was really, really cool. So they had a great finishing sequence. A lot of people contribute this as being, two of the greatest superstars to end the Royal Rumble and one of the greatest finishing sequences to a Royal Rumble matchup. So I thought that was awesome. In the end, The Undertaker would come out victorious. The 2007 Royal Rumble winner would go on to WrestleMania to contend for the World Heavyweight Championship against Batista in a great matchup. So that closed off the Royal Rumble matchup and the 2007 Royal Rumble pay-per-view on a whole. On the whole, I thought this was a solid show. I didn't think it was a great show, but no matches were bad. Everything was either good to great to really, really enjoyable. The Hardys versus Eminem match, quick recap here. Fun match to kick off the show. ECW title match was decent for what it was. Obviously, nothing you need to go out of your way to see, but, it served its purpose, and they furthered the feud between Lashley and Test. Batista, Kennedy had a good match. They would have better matches over on SmackDown and, later than this and earlier than this as well. But, for a filler feud on the Rumble show, it was a good match. Cena and Umaga, an awesome match like I talked about before. Cannot praise this match enough. Really a coming out party, so to speak, for Umaga and the strong showing he had here. And John Cena he would show in one of the best matches of his career at this point. Maybe even looking back, maybe one of the best matches of his career up to this point. Having a very strong showing against the Samoan Bulldozer and showing that he can hang with the best of the best, even though he was the champion and not the challenger. He was kind of like the underdog in this contest. So, great match there. The Rumble match I already talked about before, and that it was a solid Rumble, nothing too great. I didn't think it was one of the best Rumbles in history, but it was a pretty good Rumble. They told some stories, but it really all came down to the final epic conclusion of that contest with The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. So I would recommend you go out of your way, you go out of your way to watch this show. I thought it was a very good show, very solid from start to finish, a lot of good, enjoyable action. No title changes. The Undertaker comes out as the Royal Rumble winner, so nothing too notable aside from Undertaker winning the Rumble. But it was a solid to very enjoyable show on the whole that I recommend that you go back and watch on the WWE Network. So in my next Wrestle Rant video, I will be talking about the 2008 Royal Rumble. And from there, we'll be talking about the 2010 and 2011 Royal Rumble pay-per-views to close out the month. So that being said, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Whatever you're doing, probably listening. I mean, I know it's a video, but you get the gist of it. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. I'll catch you guys in my next Wrestle Rant video. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys then.